Okay, and this unboxing and possibly our next one of our next restorations is an eBay purchase, and I will give you a little forewarning on these kinds of purchases. This was purchased as is, untested, and when something is as is, untested in this realm here, that means 90% of the time there's usually something wrong with it. So this is probably going to be a future restoration project for us as well. So let's open this up and see what we're going to have to work with. So I got a great deal on this. Wonderful seller. There's a note that says, enjoy, Nan and Mom just box it. So they boxed it and sold it. So here's what we have. This was very nicely packed. I give the seller here hands up. Very, very nicely packed, padded. Very pleased. Usually you get these things and they're just bubble wrapped and flimsy bubble wrap, and you know, oftentimes, not often, but I've had a few that have come in and the case has been so brittle. These are so old. Plastic is, it brittles really easy, that there's just, you know, some of them have just come in totally disintegrated. So let's see what we have here. Obviously it's a Commodore 64. The serial number ends in 1151, so we'll see if the serial number matches on the unit. From what I recall, I thought I might have already checked that, and I'm pretty sure it did. So here's the inside, which is in very nice condition. No soiling. There's no power supply, but I don't use the power supplies anyways, and I do have vintage power supplies in order to bring this, you know, back as if you first bought it. The reason I don't recommend using the vintage power supplies on these is they're old 5-volt and 9-volt, but the 5-volt linear power supplies will spike after 30 years, and that voltage spike will burn up your computer. So if you buy one of these, first of all, let me give you some tips. It's a warranty card. Let's see what condition this thing is in. So it's a little bit discolored, which is normal with age. We could retrowrite it. That's just another segment of how to bring some of the color back to life. The serial number in the back matches the box. Ends in 1151. I don't know if that picked that up or not. So I've got a good serial number computer here. These all look clean, look like a computer that was well taken care of. So, you know, we'll put it on the bench. Let's just take a quick peek inside, see if it was ever messed with. You also have to be careful with the screws on this. Like I said, the case is very brittle, especially when you tighten things back up. Hand tighten. Don't tighten all the way, because I can pretty much assure you that if you tighten too tightly when you're putting things back, it will crack the standoff that the screw goes in. So let's see what we have here. There's tabs are in the back that are also prone to break off if you're not careful. these little tabs right here. Right here. They fit inside these little tiny recesses in the back of the case, and so we're going to go ahead and take the keyboard and this off to make it easy. So these tabs that I'm talking about are right here. I don't know if the camera can pick that up. So they easily break if you're not careful in pulling these apart. So you gotta take your time with that. So here's the inside. When we restore it, we'll usually get rid of that shield. It's kind of worthless. It's usually, I believe, put in there to combat interference. But all it does is just create more heat. These components inside get really hot. A lot of these are soldered in, so if there's any that are bad, we'll have an issue. But this computer, I can tell, was repaired or worked on at one point. For one, this is usually glued on to here, and it wasn't. The other telltale sign is these are RAM chips, the memory chips. These are usually prone to go bad, and I can tell 3 of them have been replaced because they are sitting on sockets, and at least the person that did this did a great job in replacing them and putting sockets in place. That way if they ever go bad in the future, you can just pop them out and put them back in instead of having to unsolder the whole thing. So it looks like this was obviously worked on at some point. So we'll just go ahead and put this on the bench and take a further dive into it and put the test cartridge on and see if it's in working order or not. The other thing that usually goes bad with these is the sound chip, and that's pretty much the most expensive chip on the board. $50 to $75 if you can find them in the original, though they do make replicas now that are much less expensive. So anyways, all right, so let me get this on the bench and you know, and see if this is another restoration project or if we got lucky and this thing works as is. So stay tuned. Okay, so we brought this computer back onto our workbench, and let's see what we got here together, shall we? So we already took the keyboard apart earlier, so let's just take that off. And we'll flip this cover back. We already kind of inspected everything inside, and it doesn't look like there's anything out of whack. I'll plug the power in, plug the monitor in. All right, let's see what we have. Let's turn it on. And we've got a good, it looks good as far as the content is concerned, the typing, but we've got different colored letters inside of all of this, and that's usually either a bad color RAM or a PLA, the PLA chip that's bad. That would be the PLA chip right here, and unfortunately it's soldered on. So I'm gonna probably have to do a little bit of unsoldering. Sometimes it could be a RAM also, but one way to figure that one out really quick is by putting a diagnostic cartridge in there, and that's what we'll do next. So I have a diagnostic dead test cartridge here, and let's see how that goes. So offhand I can already see there's just different colors on some of the text. It's going through the RAM test right now, so pretty confident it's not the RAM that we're looking at. Oh, there we go, the screen started changing some colors. Like I say, this is usually indicative of either the color RAM or the PLA chip. Here it's going to test the color RAM. Nah, it seemed to pass the color RAM test okay. Might as well see if the SID chip, oh, awesome. Like I said earlier, that's probably the most expensive chip on the board is the sound chip. And this is looking really good. All right, so it looks like basically the PLA is what we're going to go after first. You know, it's interesting. I see a lot of YouTube videos on Commodore 64 restorations, and the thing is that you know, everybody comes out with their meters and you know, their logic probes and all that stuff, but you know, a lot of the things that you see is rather common. PLA, the VIC-2, which is the chip that's in here. Let's see if we can pop this out. All right, it's kind of tight in there, so I'll pop it out later and I'll show you that. There's a lot of, you know, there's just commonalities. There's the RAM, and you can test all you like along the way, but you know, oftentimes it leads you down a rabbit hole, and you know, you end up replacing chips anyways. If you look at the screen, you use a diagnostic dead test, you can pretty much tell what the issue is the majority of the time. Now, if a computer's been opened up, you don't know, you know, if someone did something to it. There could be bad traces as well. So, I mean, I can understand the troubleshooting, but in this case, you saw a computer screen pop up. The only thing that was wrong with it was some colors that were messed up in some of the text. Like I said before, it's either usually, you know, either your memory, your PLA, or your color RAM, and I doubt it's the memory. We did a diag test, went through the memory. Not that the diag test is always 100%, but it just leads us to believe that the PLA is probably what we're going to go after here. And you know what? I could have gone through this with test equipment as well, kind of ended up going to the same conclusions. But you're going to see that, you know, I have test equipment, I have oscilloscopes, I've been restoring Commodore computers for a very long time. I have a ton of them. So, you know, so I think I can speak just through my own personal experience that, you know, you don't need a whole lot of test equipment to figure out the Commodore. There's just very basic things that go wrong with it. And, you know, just looking at the screen, having a good diagnostic test cartridge leads you probably 75% to what the problem is. You end up replacing chips. Fortunately, all the chips on this are soldered on, so we're going to have to do a lot of unsoldering, but that's why you have a good soldering vacuum, good soldering pump, and and we'll go at it. So stay tuned. Let's replace that PLA, socket it up, and see what we've got to work with after that. Okay, first things first. Let's go ahead and take this board out of the case. There's about 7 screws that we're talking about here. It's 3 on the bottom. And there's usually 4 at the top. The screws look really nice. They're not corroded like a lot of times they are. On the top one here, make sure it's the bigger screw, not the smaller screw. The smaller screw holds this plate in place, so you want to make sure you get the bigger screw. All right. This trash, it's junk. Leaves us with this board. Okay, we'll clean this up a little bit. I'm looking at these. So these things that you see here oftentimes crack. They're so brittle, they get wiped out. There's you know, 3D parts that you can get, you know, to clean these out and make new standoffs in there. I'll leave that for another video. I do that often, but one cool thing is that someone has on Thingiverse 3D printed parts in restoring these, and they have a little ring that goes, if these are still on here, which they are, there's a little ring that you to fit right over it to keep them from breaking up. You just super glue the little ring on. So again, I'll save that for another video, but this looks really good. So the first thing that I like to do with these is the most expensive chip, I can't say that enough times, is that sound chip. So the first thing we're going to do is take out the sound chip and put it aside. You don't want anything messing that up. So that's U18 is the sound chip. Take that out. Nice. So put that aside. So it looks like the RAM might have been replaced at the factory, maybe, with the sockets. I'm not sure. Or someone did a really good job with this because they soldered this bottom shield back on. So we're gonna have to unsolder that, and that really sucks. I hate doing that. It's a pain in the butt. But we'll do that. I promised you earlier we take a look at the VIC chip in here. So this has residue from the thermal paste that they put on there to absorb the heat. So looks like it's one of the old ceramic chips. We can clean that up with alcohol, and we'll probably take this chip out as well. Like I said, I'm really usually very careful with chips. What I am noticing on here, maybe this might be the issue before we take apart and replace that PLA, is there's this, I don't know if we can get this on camera, there's this chip right here. Let me see, zoom that in there. There we go. That chip right there is off of, it's not flat on its base. So that is highly suspect. So we're going to be, I think I'm going to replace that chip first. If I'm going to unsolder, I might as well put a socket there. That is a huge possibility. So let me get the soldering pump going here. And let's attack that one. We might get lucky and not have to unsolder 28 pins or whatever the PLA chip is here. So we'll be right back. Okay, so let's see what we got here. First of all, let me take out this VIC chip. I cleaned out the VIC chip. Turns out it wasn't a ceramic one, and that's kind of good because those other ones are pretty old. This is a 1983 chip. Take that out, put that aside. So we got the two important chips out of here, out of their sockets. This one, I toned it off camera, and it looks like it's making contact with everything that it should be. So even though it's in there all hokey like, we'll still go in there and fix that up. So after doing some continuity testing on it, all the pins are seated, even though the chip is awkwardly placed. So I'm still going to revert back to the PLA, but you never know. But we're still going to replace and socket this one anyways, at least straighten that up. So first things first, I usually like to put some flux on the solder that's already there. Okay, we'll start with the easy one. This one, it looks like this was taken apart and put back. together. So I appreciate that they put it back together again, but quite honestly, these shields are worthless. So I wouldn't have bothered. Once you have one side, you can kind of push the other side out, so it becomes easier to take these in the back off. So that one's already gone. This one's already gone, so it just leaves this one. Yeah. Wasn't as bad as I thought because this has been worked on before. Some of these weren't soldered on all that well, so this should just pop right out. And that's trash. So that pretty much leaves us where we want. Let's take a look at the bottom here. You can see where this was worked on before, because there's flux still on these pins. So we'll kind of clean that up with alcohol after we finish soldering our stuff. So what we want to do is, that's the one we want to take out and reseat. And we'll just mark that. So we know that's where that one is. And then, so that's the wrong one. This is why we mark these things. That's what we want right here. That's the 2 rows there, and then the PLA is this one here. There's nothing to the left, so we'll just mark that. Everybody has their own system. Some people use masking tape or tape or whatever to mark off. It's really easy when you're unsoldering to get confused with the pins and take out one side of the right chip and then the wrong side on the next chip next to it instead of working both sides. So you just kind of have to be careful with that. I usually just, put it against the light and then identify the chips one more time just before I start unsoldering. So, all right. So let me work up the vacuum pump, the solder pump, and then we'll be right back. All right. So let's start unsoldering some of this. Basically, first thing that I like to do is put a little flux. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. And then we start. If you're using a soldering pump for the first time, starting getting into it, you always want to unsolder a little bit first, wiggle the pin a little bit, turn the pump on to unsolder, and leave it on for about a second after you lift it to make sure that it stays kind of relatively clean. So this point, what I do, I got all the solder in there, so I just kind of tap each one of the pins. If you hear it click, it'll basically unsolder what little residue is left, keeping it from popping out. There we go, found it. So now everything's wiggling out. Should be able to pull it right out at this point. Okay. So we're going to resocket that one. Like I said, I really don't think that's the problem, but we'll do that one first and see what happens. Okay, so basically what I like to do when I take a chip out and I'm about to put in a new chip or an old chip, it doesn't matter. So I like to test them first. For a lot of these chips, I use this, a TL866-2 universal programmer. And I'll show you how to use that. Now I have a C64 board that's full of ZIF sockets for chips that don't fall into this, but in this case I have this guy here, and there we go. So this is a 193 chip. It's in the programmer, and the programmer software, let me load that up, has a large library of chips in it that that can be tested. So in this case, I have the chip, loaded in here. I'm basically going to go up to the select IC. You can see I have a lot of Commodore 64 chips already loaded in here. I could check RAM. I can check all sorts of chips in there. So I don't need to go and plug these chips into my ZIF socket at 64. I reserve that mainly for the PLA and the VIC-2s and all that stuff. So this is a 193 chip, so I click on that, and then the IC is already plugged into the ZIF socket. So I click test. There we go. Everything comes back. The test result is normal, so this chip is good. So I can move forward with putting that into the board. So that's how I test chips. Very quick, very easy. Okay, so we're gonna solder a socket into play here. So it's a 16 pin socket. So there's the socket. Make sure the little notch is up, and I use tape to keep the socket in place initially. Once you solder a couple of pins on it, the corner pins, it'll stay in place on its own, but need something to hold it in place initially. So we got that. So now, let's go ahead and solder this puppy in place here. Okay. Always clean your soldering iron afterwards. It's a nice thing. Always clean your tools. That's what my dad used to tell me. That way they last forever, which they do. You might laugh at my soldering iron, but I've had that thing forever and I'm comfortable with it. So I have enough soldering stations with soldering irons on them that I've never used, because that iron there has lasted me forever. So now we just get a little alcohol on here, wipe out any flux, and sometimes the flux leaves sticky residue, so what I like to do just absorb it there like new, and give it one last look. Everything is perfect. All right, so we'll put this chip back in. Nice. All right, so that's in all the way now. Okay, so let's put, we don't need the SID chip, we only need the big chip back in for us to test this out. I have to make sure it's seated. Alright, so let's just give this a test and see. Like I said, my bet is still on the PLA chip, but at least we got that one reseated the way it should be. Alright, let's give it a shot. Well, what do you know? Let me turn this over. Definitely the PLA, I think, because I still have text that is different colors. So let's go with our first inclination, change the PLA chip, and see where we go from there. So let's do that next. PLA chip time. So that's the PLA right there. We already marked it here. Put some flux on these pins. Okay, soldering pump going. Alright, so let's take out this little puppy here. Okay. Again, take care of your equipment. Make sure that nozzle is always clean, because solder gets stuck in it and dries up in there, and boy, it's a pain in the butt to take out, even if you reheat it. Alright. Okay, I think I got you. Boom. I always hate to just pry things out, but it doesn't look like I lifted any pads off of that thing. All the pads here are in place, and all the traces below are intact. So just a little bit of cleaning. All right. So now we're going to put a new socket in there. We're also going to test this chip on the other board. So socket. Don't really need tape for this, because this fits snugly in there. We'll just keep an eye on the pins. We're running out of solder. Don't worry, I got plenty more where that came from. All right, that's done. I think we are set. So what we want to do here, we'll test that PLA chip, but I have a known good one. So let's see if the known good one resolves this issue. Pop a PLA chip in here. This is a new PLA chip from old stock. There we go. Much better. Sometimes with these sockets, the pins, they slide a little bit and they get into a little position where it's not conducive. It's not really good. So you got to double check them all the time. All right. So let's just test this out now. The new PLA. So is it PLA or color RAM? And the winner is, it was a PLA. So there you go. No more weird color changes. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pop in that test cartridge one more time. And we'll also put the SID chip back in, the sound chip. Well, it's looking good so far. You got a nice screen. It's nice and bright. No weird colors in the text. Let's see if we can go through all the tests here. I put the sound chip back in, so let's make sure that we get sound again. Always makes me nervous messing around with the sound chip, even taking it out and popping it back in, and it's so sensitive. And like I said, that's the most expensive chip on the board. So far, so good. Those bad are normal because we don't have the harnesses plugged in. There's the sound. That's what we're looking for. That's the third one. There's 3 sounds. So this thing is a wrap. The PLA. And we fixed a hokey chip that was sticking out. So there you have it. Easy as pie, and we didn't have to use any test equipment. I mean, we did use, a programmer to just test the chip out of it. But you can see I didn't need to go through a whole bunch of rigmarole for it. For those chips that programmer can't test, that's why I have this board. And this board, as you can see, has got zip sockets for just about everything. And the reason they're raised is some of these things, some of the zip sockets, if you try to put them into the actual native socket that's in there, they're too close together and they won't fit, and you have to start dremeling some stuff out underneath to make room for the capacitors, what have you. That's how I started this. And I'm thinking, that's ridiculous. So basically, I just put risers underneath each of these and brought them up. So there's a zip socket for just about anything. But like I say, that programmer board is really what you want to use because it's really simple, it's really fast. And heck, you can check a whole lot of chips, all your memory chips, everything, in one sitting. So, all right. So we'll put this back in the case. Give it one more test after we close it up, especially with the keyboard. And then we can call this one done. This board, for the most part, is pretty clean. Like I say, we don't put the shielding back on, but I will do one thing. The shielding does provide a little bit of a gap up. And the reason that's important is because when you're fitting a cartridge in here, if it's sitting too low, it's going to hit this little lip here. So I like to put in little rubber spacers where those go. Okay, so here are the spacers that I like to use. They're just little rubber spacers. I'll need 7 of them. Because there's 7 screws. So it's a matter of just laying the spacers over each of these little guys and making sure we don't knock them off when we put the board back on. This will give a little bit of clearance, like I said, so the cartridge doesn't hit that lip, since the board's going to sit a little bit lower now without that shield. Alright, get this thing on there. Just like that. Put the screws back on. And again, like I've said before, probably a million times, but you'll never get me tired of saying it, hand tighten. Do not, well, hand tighten. Don't over tighten. As soon as you over tighten and you hear something go crack, and you know that you just busted that stand off. So keep that in mind. Let's hope we don't bust a stand off here. Otherwise, we'll be doing another video on how to repair standoffs, which I will do in the future. Just wasn't prepared to do it now. Okay. We'll put some thermal paste on this. Okay. You don't need an overly thick layer of this stuff. Okay. There we go. So that's back in place. Next, I'm going to put the keyboard goes back in. There's a little notch, you can't mess that up. Okay, so before we do anything, I'm going to plug the power supply in and just turn this on. Make sure the LED goes on. We don't have to replace the LED. Yeah, there we go. Because it would suck to put this whole thing together, find out that the LED is bad, and you have to take the whole dang thing apart again. Alright, so before anything else, should have done this before. I'm going to take a quick picture of this. I always like to take a picture of the inside of the computers along with the serial numbers, and make a note of them for inventory purposes. Alright. So you have to be just as careful putting the case back on as you were taking it off, because of those tabs. Those tabs fall into these recesses in here, and you just have to do it really slowly. Otherwise, you will hear things crack. That's not good. Yeah, okay. There's one in, two in. There we go. All in. Alright, so now we can screw these things back and case back, and I'll feel a lot better once we get this thing back together again. Now, I could have electro-brighted this case to bring back some of the color, but I got so many of them. That I figured, well, one day I'll do it, and I'll just do a whole bunch at once. Again, hand tighten. Well, I mean, don't over tighten, but you know what I mean. These things are brittle. And you will know when you broke something, because you will hear a crack, and it's not going to be a nice sound. All right, what I noticed also, this is missing some rubber feet here on the bottom. So we're gonna go ahead and replace those as well while we're at it. And before we do that, I go through a lot of alcohol, but it's clean. You always want a clean surface when you're dealing with stickers. Okay. By the time you throw out that Q-tip and put the alcohol back, it should be dried up. And then there's one. There's two. It's 3 and 4. And we'll take a quick picture of the serial number here. We'll put a note on it. With the board number 250407, and then we replaced the SL was it 193. We didn't really replace the chip, but we put a socket in, so it doesn't matter. We replaced the PLA, and there's some RAM that was socketed, so we'll say that that was replaced as well. Okay, just for the sake of... Alright, so now let's just make sure that this all works. One last time. Come on, baby, power up. Start putting some keys together. So there you go. One more for the books. All right, so we're ready to call this done. Let's get our original box back. So I hope you enjoyed this video and that you saw that this is not rocket science fixing some of these things, but just know that if you buy any, or you buy a Commodore or an Amiga or any of these computers on eBay and they say untested, 90% of the time you're going to be fixing something, because realistically they're untested for a reason. So at least you got a little bit of head start here, and I'm always happy to answer any questions. So, feel free to comment or feel free to send an email. So appreciate everything, and hope you have a wonderful day. Enjoy life.